thank everyone for taking time out of your busy schedules to attend tonight's event. As you can see in the chat box, we have people from all around the country, including Alaska, joining us this evening. And if you're just signing in right now, again, I would invite you to write in the chat box, which is on the lower right-hand side of the screen, where you are joining us from tonight. My name is Miguel Escobar, and I serve as the Senior Program Director for Leadership Resources here at the Episcopal Church Foundation. And just a few words about what the Episcopal Church Foundation is. We are an independent, lay-led organization whose mission is to build the capacity of Episcopal congregations in the areas of vision and planning, leadership development, as well as financial capabilities. And we do so with Episcopal congregations, dioceses, and other institutions throughout the church. We have a wide variety of programs. If you haven't already, I'd encourage you to check out our website at episcopalfoundation.org and publication at ECF Vital Practices, which is at www.ecfvp.org. One of the most important programs that we do is what we're doing this evening, which is we provide free online education on a wide variety of the leadership, vision, and financial challenges that are facing Episcopal congregations today. So again, thank you very much for joining us, and I hope you will join in the conversation either through the chat box or by sending in your questions throughout. Tonight's main presenter is Donald Romanik, who is the president of the Episcopal Church Foundation. Donald has served as the president of ECF since 2005, and he has often said that he has served as a vestry member and in nearly every single role that an Episcopal congregation has for a lay leader in the church. So it comes with a lot of experience in this area. And one of the areas that he is helping ECF to focus on, especially at this point, is vision and planning. And so this is very much in keeping with the current focus also of ECF. And we look forward to hearing from Donald in just a moment, but let us begin with prayer, and specifically a prayer that will embolden us to vision more deeply. So let us pray. Disturb us, Lord, when we are too well pleased with ourselves, when our dreams have come true because we have dreamed too little, when we arrive safely because we sailed too close to the shore. Disturb us, Lord, when with the abundance of things we possess, we have lost our thirst for the waters of life. Having fallen in love with life, we have ceased to dream of eternity, and in our efforts to build a new earth, we have allowed our vision of the new heaven to dim. Disturb us, Lord, to dare more boldly, to venture on wider seas, where storms will show your mastery, where losing sight of land, we shall find the stars. We ask you to push back the horizons of our hopes and to push into the future in strength, courage, hope, and love. Amen.
Amen.
And so, again, tonight we're going to be talking about strategic thinking for congregations, and we're going to begin just by highlighting one cathedral story that ECF has worked with. We will spend some time defining the difference between mission and vision, as well as the difference between strategic thinking and the traditional strategic planning model that many of us are familiar with. We will then show how once you've defined mission and vision, you can start to name goals and evaluate strategies.
You have been muted. Your microphone has been turned on.
And we will end with a discussion on next steps. So hopefully we'll take all these concepts and illustrations and we'll ground them in some concrete next steps that folks can take into the future. And with that, Donald.
Thank you, Miguel. And welcome, everybody. Thank you all for being part of this webinar tonight. As Miguel said, I've been president of ECF for close to 10 years, and more I'm convinced that the ongoing process of engaging in visioning and planning is critical not only to organizations like ECF, but every local faith community, congregation, and diocese. And it really needs to be an ongoing process rather than the traditional model of engaging in a period of planning, then a period of implementing. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But let me just give you an example of one cathedral in a mid-sized city that we recently worked with who is engaging in a deliberate process of visioning and planning. And we'll call it St. Mary's Cathedral. And part of the process that they engaged in was to identify their ministry strengths, to create an identity statement, because part of the issue was who were they and what was God calling them to do. They identified 3 key areas to do some further work, and they developed strategic criteria for evaluating how they might move forward with those goals. And through the course of our time together, they came up with the identity statement that's indicated on your screen. St. Mary's Cathedral is an Episcopal faith community in the downtown area that is faithfully engaged in participatory, meaningful, and relevant worship, forming and empowering Christian disciples and nurturing each other, the city, the region, and the diocese through outreach, fellowship, enrichment, hospitality, and service, all in the name of Jesus. Now, before they came up with that identity statement, they basically looked at their ministry strengths. You know, especially being a downtown church where there were other churches in the area, what unique qualities did they have that could help identify not only articulating who they were, but where they might go in the future? And some of it was, you know, typical of a lot of Episcopal congregations, their theology and their worship, their openness, the scope and size and attractiveness of their buildings. They were fortunate enough to have a balanced budget and no debt. Like a lot of downtown areas, they were experiencing kind of a renaissance of people downtown, looking for connections with amenities, including churches. You know, their hospitality, their history, some of their unique ministries, especially with some of the indigenous peoples in the area, their music program, their youth program, the fact that they were one of the largest congregations in the diocese. And because they were a downtown parish in a capital city, they also felt that they had a unique role of hospitality to the wider community. So through this process, they came up with this identity statement, which they were very proud and finally to be able to articulate who they were and what they felt they were engaged in. And then through that process, they looked at 3 key areas they felt they needed to come up with specific goals and action steps. The whole area of how did they take their culture and the excellence of their current worship, but maybe enhance it to be more meaningful, more contextual, more responsive to the new people coming in. They looked at the area of discipleship, which was about Christian formation and empowering their members to live out the gospel in their daily life and work. And they also looked into that whole area of nurturing each other, nurturing the community, nurturing the diocese, kind of nurture being similar to both in-reach and outreach. And finally, the process they engaged in, which is really critical, is, you know, when you come up with a lot of ideas in brainstorming, how do you evaluate how, you know, when and how and under what circumstances you move forward with a particular idea? And so they came up with the idea of whether or not the idea of the ministry or the program fit into the identity and the culture and the mission of their community. And that was one of the important reasons on why they came up with this process of an identity statement. They looked at the idea, for example, a lot of outreach ideas came out, food banks, homeless ministries. But they also realized that other organizations and other churches in the area were also engaging in this. So they didn't want to do anything that would duplicate what other people were doing. And they also thought that if other people were doing important ministries, perhaps there could be more collaborations rather than trying to reinvent the wheel. They also were firmly convinced that in order for a strategy to go forward, they had to identify passionate lay leadership who would help move the ball forward. That was an important part of their screening process. They also wanted to make sure that there were resources to move forward with the program, whether that was financial, people resources, or the space to make that happen. The other issue was, is the idea sustainable? Often a parish will come up with a strategy, an idea, or a new ministry opportunity, but it can't be sustained over the long run. They also felt that looking at some of these ideas as pilot projects was one way of moving forward. So that's just to give you some context of how one congregation we worked with kind of moved from this period of stasis, if you will, engaging in a visioning process and coming up with some specific next steps. So let's move on to the issue of mission and vision. And as Miguel said earlier, often mission and vision, the terms are used interchangeably. But I think it's important, at least for the context of this discussion, and as you look at engage in the process of visioning and planning, you clearly kind of know the difference. Mission is basically a description of what God is calling you to do at this moment in time. Basically, your mission statement is what you feel you're called to do and what you're actually engaging in. Most mission statements are in the form of most missions are in the form of a statement, but often your mission could just be articulated in kind of a list, a simple list of what you do. And here's an example. At St. Mary's, we are called to welcome everyone, gather weekly for worship and form faithful disciples, serve the poor and least of these in our midst, and use our time, talents, and treasure in service to God's kingdom. I think it's important that when you do decide to come up with a mission or identity statement, it's really important that somehow you describe your uniqueness and why you may be different than other Episcopal churches or other Christian communities or other faith communities in the area. Sometimes people come up with very simple mission statements like, we are the body of Christ. And while obviously that is an important part of our identity as Episcopalians, as Christians, for purposes of visioning and planning and for purposes of articulating who you are to the kind of outside community, it's often helpful to be a little more precise and a little more unique. Next slide, please. Then there's the idea of a vision. Vision is a hopeful picture of what the future might look like if your congregation fully lives into your mission and your mission is finally realized. So if your mission is to engage in meaningful, relevant worship and have Christian formation for all people, perhaps the vision of that mission is that you will form faithful disciples who live out their faith in their daily life and actually make a difference in transforming their local communities in the world. The beauty of an identity statement, which we talked about in St. Mary's, it's kind of a blend of both what St. Mary's feels is its current mission and what it's called to do, and their vision of how they want to live that out in a broader way. We'll get back to that as we move forward, but the importance of a vision statement, some people say, well, why bother to get involved in these aspirational statements? Vision statements, much the way the prayer we read, it is a way of rallying people around a future of the congregation, a future of the faith community, and it's a good way of focusing your resources and your ideas toward a goal that you feel is something you all should aspire and ascribe to. And to give you an example, let's look at the next slide. So back to our St. Mary's example, where they looked at their mission and what they did. They identified their kind of core strengths and their ministry assets, and they articulated an identity statement. They basically came up with kind of three broad strategic goals that the next step of the process then was to take these broad strategic goals and to then convert them or flesh them out into specific strategies and action steps. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But based on their mission, based on their identity, based on where they felt they wanted to be going, they cast a vision of strengthening their worship by introducing some different types of services, some alternative approaches to traditional Anglican liturgy, to try worship at different times, both on Sunday and during the week, and also to incorporate some worship experiences that met the linguistic and cultural differences of some of the people in the wider community. When they looked at building discipleship, that was based on the fact that they felt they had a solid Christian formation program in place, but the idea of Christian formation was not only education, but to build disciples who would actually engage in God's mission in the world. And the idea of nurture was very important because they felt that in order for people to be actively engaged in God's mission in the world, they really needed to kind of nurture their membership and empower them for the work of ministry. So when you talk about vision, we often look to the, John Cotter, who one of his seminal works is Leading Change. And what he says is that vision plays a key role in producing useful change by helping to direct, align, and inspire actions on part of a large number of people. So the combination of articulating your mission, casting a vision, and often in the form of an identity statement, really is a good way of articulating who you are, what you feel God is calling you to do, and again, this further idea of if you live into your mission, what might the community and the world look like? Hence the vision statement. Next slide. The title of this webinar is Strategic Thinking for Congregations, and I guess more and more I'm convinced that while strategic plans have their place, what is really important is that congregations, especially through their leadership bodies, the vestry, engage in ongoing strategic thinking. And that may be, and when I mean ongoing, I mean an ongoing process of looking at issues and challenges and opportunities in a strategic way. So what is the problem with traditional strategic plans? And when I'm talking about traditional strategic plans, I'm talking about those where you engage in a planning process for 6, 9, 12, 18 months. and you develop this strategic plan that somehow is supposed to get you through the next 3 to 5 years. And what is the problem with traditional strategic plans? Often they generate more goals than can be reasonably pursued. And as we move forward with this process tonight, you'll see some suggestions that we have on how to make that a much more simpler, user-friendly process. They mistake goals for strategies, and we're going to talk about the difference in a moment. The traditional strategic plan, there's an expectation that strategies fit into rigid timelines. And the other problem is it's very difficult in this day and age to forecast 3 to 5 years into the future from a snapshot in time. It's often difficult to forecast 3 to 5 months from a snapshot in time, but the 3 to 5 year strategic plan, I think, is becoming, if not unhelpful, at least somewhat anachronistic. And the question we all ask ourselves is, in light of today's pace of change, is it still reasonable for congregations to do 3 to 5 year plans? Okay, so what is the alternative? And what is strategic thinking? Next slide, please. So the idea behind ongoing strategic thinking is that we call it real-time thinking. It's iterative and ongoing. It identifies kind of reasonable short-term goals that are aligned with both the mission and the long-term vision of the congregation. It identifies strategies and action steps for achieving those goals. And it evaluates both the long-term and short-term strategies in light of your mission, your financial capacity, your uniqueness, and more. And the very simple way of kind of incorporating this idea of strategic thinking is to take a big picture issue and at every vestry meeting spend 15, 20 minutes, a half hour talking about the big picture issue. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But the idea is that it's an ongoing process and it does not separate planning, visioning from implementation. Because in this day and age, whether we do it at the congregational level, in our daily lives, in our work, we're actually planning and implementing on an ongoing, if not a daily basis. Next slide. So let's stop here. Are there any kind of questions or pushback or concerns on anything that we've discussed so far? And I have some questions here that you might want to look at the vestry level or with your leadership. What are your congregation's ministry strengths? Does your congregation's mission and vision reflect those strengths? Does your congregation have a hopeful vision for the future? Back to the whole issue of strategic plan. And do you understand the difference between a hopeful vision, goals, and strategies? And we're going to talk a little more about that in a moment. But let's stop here and see if you have any questions so far. Okay, are we ready to move forward? There'll be opportunities toward the end of the presentation for more open discussion.
I think we are getting one question.
Okay.
Just 1 second. Yeah. Okay. Well, we're getting a
okay.
Thank you.
You know, in the traditional strategic plan, there are kind of goals, objectives, strategies, action steps. A lot of kind of descriptors, again, often used interchangeably. And a goal is basically a specific and measurable statement of a desired result. And goals need to be aligned with vision, and goals in and of themselves are meaningless without particular strategies for meeting those goals. And a typical goal would be to increase membership, enhance stewardship, increase our involvement in the local community. Um, Back to some of the broader goals with our friends at St. Mary's, they talked about enhancing their worship, forming disciples. Those are very broad but measurable statements of a desired result that need to be fleshed out. The other thing that more and more I'm convinced of is that when people do engage in traditional strategic plans, they often come up with 5, 6, 9, 10, 12 goals, which become overwhelming. What I like to advocate is that while you're engaged in this ongoing strategic thinking process, that on a regular basis, maybe at an annual basis, you articulate 3, maybe 4 goals for that year. 3 or 4 goals that are very contextual, that are very timely, and respond to the immediate challenges, concerns, or opportunities of the congregation. And I mean, back to where St. Mary's was, based on that day-long conversation, they felt those were the 3 goals that needed to be immediately addressed in order for them to be able to move forward. And sometimes the goals will be, immediate or 3 within the context of the current year. Sometimes they kind of extend into the following year, maybe a 15-month time frame. But I think it's not very helpful to articulate goals that go beyond kind of a 6 to 18-month period, because then you're getting stuck in this strategic planning process where you get overwhelmed, and when people are overwhelmed, as Miguel hinted at, you put the plan on the shelf where it gathers dust. So the idea behind articulating reasonable goals that you can measure on a short and long-term basis is that it not only helps you focus your energy and your resources, it is also something that people can embrace because it's manageable, measurable, and doable. So this is a typical, back to evaluating proposed strategies. And some of you have said that you're currently you either currently have a plan, or in a couple situations, the vestry may be meeting to kind of engage in this strategic process. If you maybe take a look at, so if the vestry is meeting in a retreat, there's no way in a retreat, I mean, even if you wanted to kind of come up with this, the traditional strategic plan, but what you might want to do is come up with 3 goals and brainstorm some strategies. So this is a typical one. Okay, increase funding for our ministries over the next 10 years. It may be increase funding for our ministries over the next 10 months or the next year and a half. So, obviously this involves questions of stewardship and engaging people in the life of the congregation. But then there are other ideas that people have. So, people come up with annual fundraising events, or what about, renting our buildings? We have lots of space. We can rent our buildings for offices or meetings or weddings. Let's start a small enterprise, a small business, or let's do a capital campaign to either, alleviate our debt or, expand our physical plant. So you come up with all these ideas and you say, okay, which ones do we do? And this is where the idea of a strategy screen comes into play. And let's look at our filters. And let's look at the next slide. So how do you evaluate any proposed strategy for a goal? So assuming the goal is generally, fundraising, enhancing the financial resources of the congregation, and you generate this list. I mean, those were just some ideas. I'm sure that if you brainstormed any idea, you come up with a lot of these. Here are some ideas on how you might kind of filter or evaluate these strategies. Does this particular idea support our mission and vision? Is it unique or does it duplicate other people's work? Is it sustainable? Is it consistent with our identity? Do we have the internal capacity to begin and sustain this initiative? Now, back to the kind of fundraising idea. Okay, if your mission is to be a downtown church that is empowering its people to respond to the needs of the city and the neighborhood and the diocese, perhaps a fundraising initiative that involved some kind of business enterprise in a suburban community would not be part of this mission and vision. For some congregations, the idea of fundraising events is part and parcel of who they are because it's part of the fellowship and that they have a long history of ongoing fundraising events. In other congregations, fundraising events are an anathema, or if there are fundraising events, they're only for outreach or to fund programs that are outside of the parish or the congregation. But whether you're evaluating something like a fundraising goal or a new outreach goal or a new Christian formation or Christian education goal, it's really helpful to go back to these types of filters. And not every congregation will have the same filter, but these are some of the ideas that you might want to look at when you're evaluating proposed strategies. So let's look at another example beyond the kind of the fundraising one that we had earlier. Let's say that your congregation wants to look at more enhanced ways of engaging with the community. And let's say you're a small to mid-sized parish. I mean, just looking at where some of you are. You're a small to mid-sized parish in a suburban community where there are growing needs. The demographics are changing. People are moving in with needs. There are kids who have educational issues. So you come up and brainstorm some ideas on how we can be more responsive to the community. And you look at everything from the classic food pantry, homeless shelter, tutoring programs, enrichment programs, a thrift shop, and you go through this. So you look at things like mission and vision. Is this type of outreach program consistent with who we are as a downtown church or a suburban congregation or a rural community? Very important that it's contextual to who you are. It goes back to your uniqueness as a congregation, and also the issue of are other people doing it? One of the things that St. Mary's, the Cathedral, looked at was we don't want to duplicate. If other people have food pantries that are sustainable and used and popular, might it make sense to just kind of, collaborate with them on that rather than trying to come up with a competitive program? Anything you start needs to have sustainability. Now, I'm a big believer in pilot programs to see whether a particular ministry or activity has legs, but in the long run, it needs to be sustainable financially, it needs to be sustainable with leadership and volunteers, and it has to really fit the identity of the community. Often when programs or ministries, are not successful or fall flat is because they're not sustainable, they have not identified the capacity to keep it going, or the program itself is not clearly part of the identity of the community. One of my favorite examples was we worked with this congregation in Southwest Florida that is in the middle of a variety of upscale kind of gated retirement communities. And they have a very active involvement and ministry to retired people, and especially younger retired people who are moving into the area. And they came up with the idea that they really wanted to attract young families with children to the congregation. The demographics of the area really did not support that notion. In fact, there was another Episcopal congregation a few miles away that was clearly in the neighborhoods that were supporting and where families with young children were. And they even got to the point where they hired a Sunday school teacher to be on call every week just in case that young family with children came to worship. After some strategic work, envisioning and planning, they really realized that while they were not going to turn away young families who may come to the door, that their identity, their mission, their vision was really about young retirees or older adults who were living in that community and empowering them as members, disciples, and engaging them in relevant outreach programs that were really not only unique, but consistent with the culture of the community. And this was a parish that had a very thriving thrift shop, be a little redundant there, but they had a very active thrift shop in a strip mall nearby, and all the proceeds of this thrift shop were used for outreach ministries in the greater area. Clearly, they went through this process. They finally established some strategy screens, and they were able to come up with some programs that not only engaged the members of the congregation, but actually served the wider community. So before we open it up to kind of further conversations and questions, so, what are some practical next steps, especially if you currently do not have a strategic plan in place? You want to engage in this kind of strategic thinking process, and you want to kind of come up with some plan to get you through a period of time where you could have some measures of success, some ideas on where you're going to put your resources and how you're going to engage people in the life of your congregation. Focus on discernment. And move the focus of your leadership team, and whether that's the vestry or a mission committee, toward an ongoing process of where God is calling your congregation. And I mentioned earlier that one very practical way of doing that is to set aside a good portion of your vestry meeting on a discernment strategic thinking process. And it may be, for example, maybe you've been struggling with the whole issue of how can Christ Church be more responsive to the needs of the changing neighborhood. So at the next vestry meeting, you make that a question for discussion and discernment. And you don't even try to solve the problem. You engage in a process of maybe brainstorming, You have people kind of, the old-timers tell their stories and the newcomers tell their stories. But rather than just looking at the budget and the buildings and grounds report and the business aspects of a vestry, you engage the vestry in a big picture conversation. Spend time discerning the ministry strengths of your congregation and how you describe them. Back to my parish in Southwest Florida, clearly their ministry strength was the fact that they had some well-to-do young retirees who had energy, passion, and resources to really want to engage in the wider community. They had a physical plant, a new physical plant that was attractive and functional and accessible. They had, and they had a lot of people, again, being retirees, who really wanted to get involved in the life of the congregation and the life of the wider community. While, the whole idea of young families and kids and Christian education for young people and all that, while they were not closing the door on that, they really saw their strengths, their mission, and consequently their vision to be in a different place. The other thing that I think we have to look at, especially if you're a small to mid-sized congregation, not every Episcopal congregation can be all things to all people. And, we still have this fantasy that if you're an Episcopal congregation, you need a Sunday school for kids, you need a choir, you need an outreach committee, you need young adult ministry, you need all these activities and ministries, otherwise you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. You really have to look at this from a very contextual situation of your strengths, what you feel you're called to do, and then, given your situation, given the fact that St. Mary's Cathedral is in a downtown area where there's a growing number of people moving in and there are urban needs and diocesan needs, what is the vision you want to cast? How is St. Mary's going to be a catalyst for transformation and change in a changing neighborhood? Or the parish that is serving young retirees? I mean, and it was a very dynamic congregation in that young retirees would move in, join the parish, and like a lot of retirees who move to Florida, often move back closer to home to family and friends when their health situation changes or when they're no longer young retirees and are older retirees. So they had this ongoing influx of new people with energy and enthusiasm with whom they were casting and implementing a vision. And identify a few major goals for 2015 or 2016 or the next 12 to 18 months, and spend the bulk of your time brainstorming strategies on how to achieve those goals. And it may be that the physical plant is in such a state that the goal needs to be, making sure our buildings meet code compliance. Or your financial situation is so precarious that you really need to focus on balancing the budget. Or you really feel that there is a need for some kind of spiritual formation that is lacking, or that you really feel that the wider congregation needs to be engaged in the process of connecting with the leadership and the rector in new and creative ways. But, so come up with maybe 3 goals. Brainstorm those ideas on strategies for achieving those goals. Come up with a filter, a strategy screen that is contextual and meets kind of your uniqueness and your unique culture and your ideas and who you are. And then come up with action steps, responsible parties, and ways of measuring success or measuring progress. But while you're doing that, you keep engaging in this ongoing process of strategic thinking. So if you have three goals, once you establish them, maybe at each meeting you take a particular goal, you measure this, what successes have you achieved to reaching that, and again, you continue to engage in that ongoing process. Does that goal still make sense? Is that goal still a priority? Or in light of the fact that we've addressed the issue of the roof, should we now move to another part of the building or put the building issues on hold and look at outreach or formation or the broader finances? I'm going to stop there and, spend some time on questions and discussion.
Okay. One of the questions that we just received is from Reese Richards, just about if there are any models of strategic plans or presumably strategic roadmap, which is another term, that we may use as a guide or see as an example.
Yes, and maybe that, yeah, we do have some models. I mean, what we have at ECF, which is a kind of a longer process, we have what we call a strategy roadmap that we would be glad to share with you. A strategy roadmap, as the name implies, is not a strategic plan, but it's kind of a big picture document that describes, our mission, our vision, our uniqueness, our strengths, a description of our current programs and ministries. What it also does, which is a really dynamic process, it articulates a big question that we as an organization want to focus on over the next year. And then from that strategy roadmap, which we review and revise on an annual basis, we come up with goals, strategies, and action steps. And we have three very specific goals with specific strategies that we measure on a regular basis and report to our board on a quarterly basis. But it doesn't have to be a fancy, multiple page document. It may be, what I would suggest, especially if you're starting from scratch, identify your mission. And it doesn't have to be a fancy mission statement. It may be, what are we called to do and what are we currently doing? And it may be we engage in meaningful participatory worship. We nurture our members for their daily life and work, and we strive to be a presence in our community. And our vision is that, that if we went away tomorrow, not only the parish, but the neighborhood, the community, and the world would be less of a place because we no longer exist. I mean, it could be something like that. And then come up with a few goals and strategies on how to move forward from where you are now to a place where you're a little more grounded, a little more spirit-filled, a little more mission-based. And I think you start with something simple. You do it at the vestry level. You maybe have a discussion with the wider community to get some buy-in. And then you look at these documents as works in progress rather than, well-polished plans that you're going to post on the wall, if that's helpful. Okay, Sandra has a question. Okay, Frank, one of our issues is an aging congregation that has difficulty thinking beyond our very traditional past. Well, it's interesting, that's not uncommon, but having people tell their stories, I mean, one of the important parts of a visioning process and strategic thinking is having people tell their stories. And there's always this fantasy that somehow things were different are better in the past. So let's say you talk to one of these people, Fran, and she's been in the congregation. She was baptized there, and she's 80 years old, and she talks about the golden days when we had 500 kids in Sunday school, and 3,000 people at Easter, and 400 poinsettia plants that the Altar Guild had to arrange. And obviously, some of this isn't not necessarily grounded in reality, but this is her recollection. So you have a conversation with Mabel, and you say, Mabel, that is wonderful, but look at where we are now. The neighborhood has changed, the people have changed. What is really, really important to you that we can continue in this, in given our current circumstances? And maybe Mabel say, well, I wish it were the old days. But maybe Mabel will say, what I really would like the opportunity to do is to gather with my old friends, and maybe knit, maybe quilt, maybe just have a cup of tea and just talk about old times. Part of it is how you engage people from where they are, whether they've just walked in the door or been there 75 years, and affirm their stories and somehow incorporate what they say into what you do and how you do it. There was another question. The chat history has been okay. There was a question about a vision, an identity statement, but the vestry getting bogged down with goals.
Yes, and I actually remember that. I'm sorry, I accidentally cleared that. The question was from, I believe, Sandra, and it was about the vestry the congregation having an identity statement, but getting stalled in the goal-setting process. And the comment was perhaps it would be better to start with a strategy screen before, kind of creating a strategy screen before going into the goal-setting process. And she was wondering if you could expand a little bit more on how to create a strategy screen.
Yeah, and I think the strategy screen, I think it has to emanate from kind of who you are, so your mission. So and there's a lot of contextual aspects to it. If you're a congregation of 60 people, that's kind of who you are. You're a family-sized congregation, so your goals can't be, your goals have to kind of fit that scope. So. And that's why some of the basic ones are: does it fit our identity as a small congregation? Do we have the capacity to do it? Do we have leadership who could be passionate about this? Do we have financial resources? Do we have volunteers? Is it meeting a need of the congregation or the community? This whole duplication type of issue. Does it support our uniqueness or who we are as a congregation? But I think the reason why vestries or congregations get bogged down in goals is they try to do too much, and that you try to articulate too many goals. And you try to push things so far into the future that people have no sense of reality. And that's why the suggestion is to come up with 3 goals that are very relevant to your unique context. There's a question about vestries and engaging the entire congregation in the process and reimagining. Yes, clearly, it's important that you engage the congregation in an ongoing visioning process. But the problem that often occurs is that just doing that in a vacuum often leads to the situation some people describe, where people either get bogged down in the old days or get bogged down in a particular issue or challenge, or the fact that, but what are we going to do about the roof? Or what we really need are more young families. or what we really need is more money or more people. And so what I would suggest is before you go to the congregation, at least have the vestry or the leadership body do some of the groundwork. So let's say you come up with a mission statement or identity statement. Then you bring it to the congregation and say, this is our working identity statement. What do you think about it? Or not what you think about it. Ask them specific questions. Do you think this identity statement reflects our history? Do you think this identity statement reflects what you all feel is our important priorities as a congregation? Asking specific questions and have people respond to a specific idea or thought is going to be much more productive than sitting around the room and saying, so what do you want to do next? Because having such an open-ended agenda often attracts the people who have axes to grind, people who kind of like to hear themselves talk, or people who are so stuck in a particular issue or a particular situation that they're not going to move from point A to point B.
Donald, if I could just add on to that, one of the things that several congregations have found very helpful is to hold a town hall on a rough draft version of the vision statement. If you remember earlier in the webinar, Donald talked about how the vision statement guides basically everything, goal setting, and from there strategy setting. So a vision document, a vision is a very important, as we said, description of a hopeful picture of the future. So spending the time to show a rough draft vision of the hopeful future and getting feedback, getting input, and getting buy-in from the wider congregation is a really great exercise, because that will be what it becomes a critical sort of tool as you move forward. And it's honestly one of the more hopeful aspects of this sort of process, because you are asking people to imagine a very hopeful future.
And it's kind of like, there's a kind of an appreciative inquiry process, because then people start focusing kind of on the good things. The other thing is, we talked about ministry strengths. That is a very good group exercise. What are we good at? What are the good things happening? And that, but having them react to something and engaging in a positive process, I think is critical. Otherwise, it can crash and burn.
Great.
There's some, and the PowerPoints will be available. We do have, we do work with congregations on visioning and planning and dioceses, and we have resources on our Vital Practices website. And if you have any questions that we could be helpful, please contact us. We're really passionate about this topic, as you can tell, and we really feel that it's important to the vitality of a congregation and, quite frankly, the future of the church. So we really thank you for participating.